Hello, everybody. I'm Zeus Caraval from ZK Research, and I'm here with this week's ZKast. Just as a reminder, these ZKasts are done in partnership with my media partner eWEEK as part of their eSpeak series. Today, I want to welcome a very special guest, Maribel Lopez. Maribel, you of Lopez Research, you certainly need no introduction. I think most people in the industry know who you are. But for the three people out there that maybe don't, why don't you just give a quick intro on yourself?
Sure. I'm the founder of Lopez Research. It's like your firm, a market research firm, covers everything from mobility through AI, and does a lot of work with enterprise IT and technology vendors.
Yeah, well, thanks, Maribel, and you're certainly one of the smartest people in the industry I've come across. So I'm delighted to have you. But I'm setting a high bar for you here, right? So um, now the big news this week. Well, the big news this week was probably the IPO of Coinbase, but we won't talk about that. But outside of that, right? NVIDIA held its annual GPU Technology Conference, also known as GTC. This is an event that historically has been used for NVIDIA to make some big announcements, right? And I think this was no different. Any just quick thoughts on the event itself? It seemed like it was a good mix of industry vision as well as product.
Yeah, I think that this actually was a fairly epic GTC. As you said, it had a lot of vision, it had a lot of product categories, a lot of evolution of different platforms that they've spoken at a lot of different GTCs. We also got, the famous, we teleported, we stargated, we wormholed. We had all the fun things that would get you excited about a GTC.
Yeah, certainly the kitchen keynote's always an interesting part of it. One thing I don't understand is why Jensen needs so many spatulas. If you look in behind him to the
Many
right,
multicolored spatulas.
yeah,
Yes.
he must he either loves to cook or somebody gives him that he's got a deal on those things or something. So, but it was a pretty good mix of industry vision and product. One of the more interesting products I know that that you feel pretty passionate about is Omniverse. Why don't you just give me some thoughts on their Omniverse, which is really it's a 3D simulation thing, but it's really more of an enterprise collaboration tool.
Well, this was the thing I thought was interesting about it, because when we first start talking about Omniverse and you get the big panorama and you're looking at graphics and you're thinking gaming, right? So a lot of things, I think when you start with GTC, you think gaming. But eventually where we pivoted that is some really practical enterprise use cases. So creating the factory of the future, modeling and simulating things, capturing information that can then be used to design and collaborate virtually. So I thought all of those were really a different way of thinking about collaboration. Like you and I have been looking at the collaboration space forever. And one of the things that we kept missing was sort of, how do you do cross-company collaboration? How do you make it more immersive? How do you make it more interesting? So maybe this isn't just you and I having a meeting style collaboration, but when you're designing, we're really getting to a new way of being together. And I actually also like the blending of the physical humans with the concept of having lots of digital overlays and robotics and blending those worlds so that we could try things that we hadn't tried before.
Yeah, I think he described it, Jensen, the CEO, described it best when he said anything big will be simulated and anything that can move will be autonomous. And the best way to do that is an omniverse. And so you think of, if I want to make a big warehouse and see how things move inside it, I can use Omniverse to do that. And I believe their new building, Endeavor down in Santa Clara, I think they actually used like an Omniverse prototype to create, right? They had that little robot that runs around it, and certainly from a if you can simulate things, you save a lot of R&D time. So that was pretty interesting.
I think one thing that should
staying on the enterprise.
One thing that shouldn't be lost on this is that we're actually going to redo a lot of things. People are talking about reconstructing buildings right now. People are talking about how do we do safe return to work? How do we do different spatial relationships? How do we add intelligence and automation and robotics into spaces? So I actually think the timing of Omniverse is actually really good timing, because as people are thinking of new ways to design physical structures, this is going to be very important technology.
Yeah, this is are we ready for this? Like this requires a pretty big shift in thinking. right? Of let's build a digital twin of whatever it is we want first, right? And digital twins have been very popular, in space and engineering. I don't know, Boeing uses digital twins to design all their engines, but you don't see it used in sort of general business layouts. And I wonder if how far ahead of our time is this, or you think with the reconstruction of buildings when people return to work, this is really right around the corner?
Um, I think that I think like anything else, there are going to be edgy companies that embrace it first. Like they were talking about Bentley and how many architectural firms use Bentley as an example for design. And if that is true, that a company that is in a lot of different places can actually propagate this software, I think they've got a really good opportunity. So it's a combination of though you have to be redoing things to actually need this, right? So I think we're
Yeah.
actually at an interesting time that maybe it gets accelerated as people are thinking of simulating more of the art of the possible of what could be in different buildings.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Now I'm going to stay on the enterprise collaboration theme, and although more traditional collaboration, right? They announced the GA of a product called Jarvis, which is a conversational AI tool. And this is something that lots of companies are in the process of building. Microsoft bought Nuance for almost $20 billion to add that capability. Jensen Huang, he did say this is almost the holy grail for AI, right? Video AI, I'm not going to say it's easy to do, but once you load a bunch of images of cats in, the AI can understand what a cat is versus what a skunk is, right? Where with voice, you have to worry about inflections, you have to worry about language, you have to worry about accents and a whole bunch of things like that. And they've pumped, I think what he said was 60,000 hours of English alone, right, through Jarvis to create a very scalable and accurate AI engine. I think he said it was 90% accurate. Now, what I liked what they did with Jarvis is they applied, you can use the new Tau, the train, accelerate, optimize, I think, is that what it is? Whatever it stands for, that graphic tool to help retrain Jarvis, the model, in your own industry. And so one of the big issues that natural language or their conversational AI has had in verticals like healthcare and legal and things like that, where there's a lot, even tech, right, where there's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, it's hard for the conversational AI agent to know what those are, but the combination of Jarvis and Tau actually lets you reprogram that. And so I see, in customer service and healthcare, in sales, these are huge use cases for this tool. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on here, right? So one is they have a large corpus now, and you can take that and you can use transfer learning, as you mentioned, in your industry. And there are some industries that have a lot of information. For example, if you just took your contact center data, which was data that has been recorded, that was allowed to be recorded forever, you can actually take a model like Jarvis or tools like Jarvis and put together with your data, and you could get to a better, more customized individual for your company sort of lexicon. But this is still a really big challenge. I think that we've come a long way, but this is one of the reasons why Microsoft bought Nuance, right? They had really deep healthcare expertise and they had really deep AI chops, right? So you get talent, you get something that's already been started. So I like where we're going with it. I think it's super powerful. I think that unlocking language, he's right. It is a holy grail to unlock language, but we've been trying to unlock language for decades now. So I don't want to underestimate the challenge of this. And I think the better, more accurate we want to make this, and in some ways, the harder it becomes. Because we've already seen we've got basic lifts now, and the frustration that you have if you do, say, a chatbot and it doesn't understand what you're talking about is a great example of that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what happens to this. I was talking with the CEO of one of the John Chambers backed companies, a company called Unifor, and who does conversational AI, and for contact center, and he thinks that 80% of customer interactions going to the contact center will be automated within a few years, and that's a pretty big number. And I think anybody, and to me, this is maybe one of the most fascinating risk rewards out there in the industry, because for everybody knows that customer service is like the be all and end all of, of business. And so ideally, if you can throw an AI agent to it and get somebody's response answered quickly, that's great. The downside, though, is if we've all gotten frustrated, right, talking to these automated systems because it doesn't know what we want. And so this creates sort of an interesting dichotomy for business leaders as to whether I go forward with it or not.
There's a lot of context that, we haven't been able to preserve context. It's one thing to technically understand what you're saying. It's a whole other thing to know what to do about it. Yeah. So therein lies the challenge. What is it that we're trying to do with this? And in some ways, just having the ability to go through a bunch of different context center transcripts and figure out all the possible things that somebody could be asking, and then surface a set of recommendations to the agent of what they should be delivering, allows you to do things like speed up training. I mean, they actually had this discussion in one of the breakouts that you and I attended with T-Mobile on how to actually make their experts more expert-like so that they could deliver solutions faster. So I think the combination of taking AI and making human-assisted services with it is a great idea.
Yeah, and so what Maribel is referring to is T-Mobile actually at the event announced that they would be using Jarvis as part of their customer service. So if you're a T-Mobile customer, I guess pretty soon, yeah, so am I. I guess we'll find out actually how good Jarvis is soon. Now, the flip side of Jarvis, the other side of the coin, is a product called Maxine. And I saw a couple of the Maxine demos, although Jensen didn't talk about it in his keynote too much. I'd like to just get your quick thoughts on that. I don't know. Obviously, the more video AI we have, the better. It can help us identify who people are. It can help us track engagement. One of the interesting features it had, though, was that if I'm like looking over here, it would correct my face and make me look at the camera. So part of the reason we use video is for the personal engagement. But now I can almost not be personally engaged with you, but still fake it, right? And so, I could be doing email and stuff, but it would still think I'm talking to you. And so, I
looking over here going, yeah, that's a great idea, Maribel, love it.
Yeah. And then, but the camera would show me still looking at you, right? So, I wonder if we're getting into an era where so much of our meetings are now AI driven that we almost are at risk of losing the human element.
Oh, this is fascinating, right? Because I think what we're desperately trying to do is figure out how we can create more engagement. And, as we move to a world of hybrid work, there's been all this discussion about, well, how do I make the people that aren't in the room look like they're there, feel like they're there? Do I make them bigger? Do I highlight them some way, right? And all that's being driven by algorithms when you think about it. Yeah. So it makes perfect sense that this, we're going to have some failures around this, but you have to hunt and peck around the edges to see like what we could do to make this more useful, more engaging, to create a sense of, people in the room together as just one example. On the flip side, you could say, okay, then it goes all the way to deep fakes. Maybe you were looking over here doing something, and then they have you over here doing something completely different. So that's totally possible as well. So I find, I put this into the category of, technology can be used for good or evil.
Yeah. So now pretty soon I can not pay attention, but I can have Maxine make sure I'm looking at you and Jarvis answer for me. So that's the ultimate, I guess.
There you go. And then you can be in 8 meetings at once, which has always been our challenge as industry analysts. No, really, I'm here.
That's actually true. Now I could, from next year, for all you vendors that want to invite me to your conferences, don't worry about conflicts. I'll be there. So,
it's going to be virtual Zeus.
Yeah. Well, that's a scary thought, huh? It's all the world needs. Now, the other interesting theme out of the show, I think, was what NVIDIA is doing on the enterprise compute side. Yes. NVIDIA isn't a company that's well known to enterprise IT, very well known to hyperscale, to automotive industry, but more and more they've become a real IT company, right? And so there were several announcements they made. Grace, DGX, Bluefield. Is there one in particular that really caught your eye?
So I'm somewhere between DGX and then something they announced a couple weeks ago with VMware, right? So
Yeah.
I think this whole concept of like, how do you take NVIDIA and virtualization with a company like VMware, who has very deep enterprise IT background, and pull those two together. So I actually really like where they're basically pushing down the stack. So you mentioned that they were doing hyperscalers and GPUs, and now they're talking about, okay, how do we create a better data center GPU, which could be used for the hyperscalers, but could be used for enterprise IT leaders as well. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity. You know, they recognize that there's a base level computing challenge that the CPUs are trying to evolve very quickly to get to. And they're trying to take their GPU stack and then say, okay, what could be done differently? Do we have to do some modifications around CPU? How do we put a toolkit around this? You know, AI is everywhere, I guess, is the basic way of saying it. And now, you know, 2-3 years ago, you and I were talking about AI, and it was only the best in class companies in the world. You know, you were a Walmart, you were a FedEx, you were the biggest in your industry. But now they want to democratize AI to get it everywhere. And I think that that's actually really valid. So they're starting to come out with products and proof points and software stacks to make that happen. So that if you're a mid-tier company, you can actually start to really work on your own AI, and you can do it in building, you can do it in the cloud. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things too about NVIDIA is most people think of NVIDIA as a silicon company, right? But they're really not a silicon company when it comes to the enterprise. They're a systems company.
Yeah.
And I think this is an area, you know, I think it was 6 months ago, they reached parity with Intel as far as market cap goes. And since then, the two have gone on a totally divergent path, right? NVIDIA has continued to accelerate well, and Intel's kind of stood still. And I think the big difference is that NVIDIA understands the difficulty in putting these complex systems together. So they put these things together and they create these reference designs for their server OEMs and things like that, you know, to go leverage. And I think a good example of that was what they announced on the CPU side, which is an area they've never been in before, with Project Grace, which they named after Grace Hopper, the one of the first, you know, female computer engineers, which is a CPU that leverages NVIDIA's multi-processing technology called NVLink to actually give you a faster performing CPU. And so it uses their, you know, ARM, who they're trying to acquire. But to me, that was a really interesting use case of the crossover from the stuff they had done on the AI side with the sort of general purpose computing.
I think it's, you know, I think if you're going to be an important company in this space, it's not enough to have just one piece of the stack. So like you were talking about, with creating a system. So if you don't give people the right tooling around that so that they can create their applications and services, it's never going to work. And I think that's one thing that NVIDIA has nailed. I think it's one thing that Intel actually has a ton of software engineers and a ton of software stack, but the way that they're executing on bringing that to market is not the same. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I mean, Jensen always talks about how we've got these layers, and, you know, here's what we provide you at each layer. And you look at it and you're like, oh, I can use it as components, or I can use it as a fully integrated system, depending on how I want to pull together my technology.
Yeah, the other interesting XPU, I guess if you want to call it that, was the DPU,
Yes.
Bluefield. This is it, and I find that a lot of this stuff is kind of back to the future in a way. If you remember back in the early 2000s, it was we had all these tow vendors, right? TCP offload engines, in which the concept was you would put a card in a server that would handle a lot of the network I/O and offload that from the CPU. Now those things weren't really all that effective, but what they've created with Bluefield is something that does networking a whole lot more. It handles a lot of the encryption processes and things like that. And so this Bluefield data processing unit, as they call it, the DPU, is really a, you know, I think can give you quite a big boost on the servers. And so the combination of what they're doing with Grace on the CPU side, DPUs with Bluefield, and obviously their GPUs, makes a pretty interesting, combination of servers. And they wrap that all up in their DGX product line, which is their pre-built servers, and they have those obviously from workstations all the way up to supercomputer size. So no matter how you want to put your computer together, they seem to have a solution for that company. So
yeah. Yeah, I actually been pretty excited about what they've been talking about in AI in general, and the concept of, being 30 times faster. I mean, they talked about a lot of great performance enhancements they made. But, one of the things that we always were thinking about is, if you look at where they are now, being a full stack company, doing acquisition for CPU, having Mellanox for networking, and then having their own AI stack. It doesn't surprise me that they can then decide to try to partition it this way to do offloads and accelerations, right? That was part of the whole plan, I think, of how do you pull this together. And I think one of the things that we have also been looking at is, like, at some point, there's only so much you can get into like one physical unit, whatever kind of XPU you want to call it, right? And so then you start to say, well, let's think of the problem differently. Let's think about, like, what can we abstract out of something and run over here so that we can get this optimized? And I kind of like where that's going, because I think it allows you ultimate flexibility while you wait for the next step function.
Yeah, that's that is interesting. And it's funny that you say you can only get so much into one piece of silicon, but they've got processors that are as small as a piece of Lego, that go in cars, all the way up to the size of a switch, right? So I guess one for every use case. So.
Well, and the multi-instance GPU is pretty cool when you think of it as a technology, right? It's like, okay, we can make it look like, it's 7 GPUs or like one really big one. Like, what do you need it to be, right? So that flexibility in architecture is super cool for different workloads.
The one last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is what they're doing on the cyber side. They've always had a pretty big cyber play, but again, historically, it's here's the tools, you cyber companies go develop it. They launched something called Morpheus, which brings AI-driven automation to the cybersecurity industry. And without talking about the product specifically, I just want to get your thoughts on the importance of this. It seems, when you look at what happened with the SolarWinds attack, and even going back to years ago to Target, where their AC system was breached, right, and it got in there. It seems the variety of threats coming in and the number of them continue to rise. I read about since the pandemic started, there's been a huge boost in phishing attacks, and it just seems like the security industry is one. When I talk to a lot of security pros, they're still stuck in yesterday in a lot of cases, trying to use traditional SIMs and things like that to solve problems that, frankly, are emanating from AI-based systems. So I'm not sure how you can fight AI-based threats with non-AI-based systems. And so, just get your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it. So there's two things going on. One, it's like you need AI to basically combat other AI. The second thing that's going on is we got to get ahead of it, because we're moving into quantum. And while that might not be, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, it's coming faster than I think any of us had thought. And in a lot of ways, quantum has the opportunity to break the security where we are today, right? So it doesn't surprise me that we would see Morpheus. I mean, I think security is the number one thing that every IT leader says that they're focused on in a Lopez research study of top 3 concerns, right? But the question is, security is a layer cake, and they keep throwing products at it. So, between 45 and 80 products for any enterprise IT stack and security, and they're still not secure, right? So what we have to wonder, like, what layer, like how high of a layer in the stack do they're putting something in each layer and it's still not working. So I think everybody would love to see an artificial intelligence based approach to security. And I think if it's nothing else but from even defining if you've been breached, because discovery has taken so long, but if you could do prevention, I mean, that's ideal.
Yeah, well, that's all we need is HAL 9000 running our networks, right, or the Terminator or something like that. But I guess that's what it requires. So, actually, it's funny you mentioned all those security vendors. A friend of mine works at one of the three-letter government agencies, and he said they literally take every security tool that's ever offered to them and they put it in their network, and they've got like 220 right now. So there's plenty of data out there. The question is how you interpret the data. So. Anyways, Maribel from Lopez Research, thanks for joining me. This was, I think, a great GTC. GTC had been one of my favorite AI events. Maybe it's the biggest AI event, but more and more, I think we'll start to think of this as an enterprise show. So I'm looking forward to more of them in the future. So.
Yeah, actually, I think it was really an inspirational event in terms of thinking about new ways to do things, everything from security to design. So big, big event. Thanks for having me, Zeus.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for joining me. And everybody out there, thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.